He thought the stone ridge would hold. He thought the earth would protect him. But even the earth was afraid of what was coming. The wind carried no sound at first, only the faint hum of a world holding its breath. Then came the tremor. A pulse beneath the ground, steady and deep, like the heartbeat of something too vast to see. Dust lifted from the plains. Pebbles danced on the cracked earth. The hunter stopped running. He turned. Far behind him, through the curtain of dust, the horizon moved. The line where the land met the sky began to shift and bulge and breathe. It was not the wind. It was not the storm. It was the beast. The colossal rhino emerged from the haze, a mountain wrapped in muscle and rage. Its skin was thick as tree bark, gray and rippled with scars of old battles. The horn, long, curved, glinting like obsidian, caught the first light of dawn. Its nostrils flared, releasing bursts of hot vapor that twisted into the cold air. The sound came next. Not a roar, not a cry, a rumble that lived inside the bones of the living. The earth answered, trembling in fear. The hunter ran again. His feet struck the dry soil, sending shards of salt-white dust into the air. Each breath cut his throat. Each heartbeat screamed louder than thought. Behind him, the thunder of hooves grew nearer, shaking the ground in long, heavy pulses. He could not outrun it. No one could. The air was full of dust now, a swirling storm of gray and gold. The sun had not yet risen, but the sky burned faintly red, as if the world itself remembered old fires. He leapt over a crack in the earth, stumbled, fell to his knees. His palms hit stone, hot, rough, alive with the vibration of the charging beast. He rose, blood in his mouth, breath tearing through his chest. The rhino's shadow fell across him before the body arrived. He threw himself sideways. The air exploded where he had stood. A gust of soil and shards of rock blasted outward as the beast's horn struck the ground. The impact carved a trench in the stone. The hunter rolled, the world spinning in fragments of dust and pain. He could smell it now, that sharp, dry scent of horn and sweat and earth torn apart. The beast turned slowly, its massive shoulders rippling under skin that seemed older than time. Its eyes were small, black stones burning with a single thought: destroy what moves. It stomped once, and the sound cracked through the plain like thunder with no storm. The hunter ran again, limping now, one hand pressed to his ribs. The ground sloped downward into a shallow ravine, narrow, lined with brittle stone and old bones. He threw himself into it, sliding down on dust and loose rock. The slope cut his hands open, but the pain was nothing compared to what followed behind. The rhino charged the ridge above him. The sound was a drumbeat of doom, every strike of its hoof tearing more of the ground loose. The slope shook. Pebbles rained like arrows, then silence. The hunter crouched in the shadow of the ravine, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the rim above. He could hear the beast's breath, harsh, steady, monstrous. It was waiting. The air grew thick. The dust settled into stillness. Only the low hiss of wind moved between them. Then, a slow scrape. The sound of the horn dragging along the stone, testing the world. The beast was listening. The hunter pressed himself deeper into the earth, fingers digging into the dirt. He tried not to breathe. Sweat rolled from his forehead into the dust. The air was so dry it felt like breathing ash. A pebble slipped from the wall above and struck his shoulder. A tiny sound. The rhino heard it. The world erupted. Stone shattered as the beast slammed its horn into the side of the ravine. The ground shook like the sky had fallen. Fragments rained from above. The hunter was thrown sideways, his body scraping across rock and dust. He crawled deeper into a narrow crack, too small for the beast to reach, the smell of stone and old bones filling his lungs. The rhino snorted above, pacing, its massive hooves pounding the ridge. Each step sent a dull echo through the ravine like the toll of a giant drum. Then, slowly, it turned away. The sound of its movement faded, one thunderous step after another, growing smaller, more distant. The hunter waited. 1 heartbeat, 2, 10. He crawled upward, hands shaking, emerging from the crack, The sky above him had turned pale gray. The dawn was coming. He looked across the plain. The ground was torn open in wide scars, trenches carved by the beast's horn, stones shattered, the dust still floating like smoke. And there, far in the distance, the silhouette of the rhino moved slowly through the haze. Each step made the world seem fragile. It stopped once, lifted its head, and turned, not in retreat, but in warning. Its gaze met the rising sun, and for a moment, it looked like a creature carved from the beginning of the world. The hunter stood frozen. His mind was not filled with fear now, but awe. The beast was not evil. It was ancient, a force older than reason, born from the same dust as himself. He realized then that what he had faced was not just danger. It was memory, the living memory of strength. The rhino vanished into the distance, swallowed by heat and light. The hunter fell to his knees, pressing his hand to the ground that still trembled faintly beneath him. He whispered, though no one was there to hear, "The ground remembers." The wind rose, soft and dry, carrying dust into the newborn sky. The first rays of sunlight touched the plain, turning every grain of sand into a spark of gold. In that light, the marks of the battle remained, deep scars in the earth, the sign that something larger than life had passed through. The hunter turned and began to walk. Each step left small prints beside the massive tracks of the beast, and as the sun climbed higher, the trembling faded, leaving behind only silence and the faint echo of the world's heartbeat beneath his feet. The sun rose slow over the salt plains, a white disk climbing into a white sky. No clouds, no shade, only brightness that cut the horizon into pieces. The land stretched endless and hollow. It shimmered with heat, the air bending above it as though the world itself were melting. There was no water, only memory of water, old channels carved through the ground, veins of cracked mud where rivers once lived. And in that emptiness, they moved. The tribe, 20 souls bound by hunger and persistence. They carried their world on their backs. Stone tools, firestones, a few skins of dried roots. Their bodies were lean, carved by sun and distance. Each face carried the same expression, the quiet determination of those who could not afford despair. They had learned to survive in silence. Speech wasted air, movement wasted strength. They walked in single file, their shadows stretched thin behind them. At the center walked Ankaro, the oldest among them, her hair silver under the sun, her skin lined with maps of the years. Her eyes were sharp, like the edge of obsidian. She had seen the world when it still had rivers, when trees still dared to grow. The others followed her not because she commanded, but because she remembered. The land was her language. By midday, they reached the edge of an ancient basin, flat, white, blinding. The air shimmered above it. It was a place where the earth remembered the sea. Salt stretched for miles, cracking under their feet like old bone. The youngest children laughed at the sound, brief, fragile laughter that vanished as soon as it was born. Their mothers hushed them gently. In this land, sound traveled far. The hunters walked ahead, scanning the emptiness. Their eyes searched for movement, for color, for anything that meant life. There was none, only mirages, pools that shimmered, then vanished when they blinked. The tribe stopped when one of the hunters raised his hand. Before him lay a carcass, dry, ancient, almost fossilized. A small gazelle, its bones curved inward as though it had tried to hide from time. Its ribs were split open, its skull cracked. The others gathered, silent. It was not hunger that froze them. It was the way the bones had broken. The marks were not from teeth. They were from force, pressure, weight. The earth itself had crushed this creature. One of the hunters, Taro, knelt beside it. He pressed his fingers to the grooves in the ground, long, deep, curved. They were not made by claws. They were made by something sharp, heavy, dragging. He looked up at Nkaro. Her face was still, unreadable, but in her eyes, The reflection of memory stirred, something she had not seen since her youth. She whispered, as though to the wind, "The one that breaks the land." They moved on, slower now. As the sun fell toward the horizon, the light turned gold, then copper. The salt plains glowed like embers. Shadows stretched and twisted. The heat softened, but the silence remained, too large, too complete. They found a cluster of stones and settled for the night. A dry wind came and went, carrying with it the smell of dust and distance. They built a small fire. The flame flickered weakly, struggling against the emptiness. The children slept early, curled under hides. The hunters sat around the light, cleaning their spears. Nicaro watched the fire. The reflection danced in her eyes like ancient stories waking from sleep. She spoke softly, her voice like sand moving. "This land forgets nothing," she said. "The beast that walks here is older than the rivers. It remembers when men were smaller than its horn." No one replied. Words could not hold what they felt. The night deepened. Stars emerged, sharp and endless, so many that the sky looked like it had been pierced. The wind quieted. Taro, the hunter who had found the carcass, stayed awake longer than the rest. He listened, not with his ears, but with the small sense every living thing has when watched, and he felt it, a weight, far away, but heavy enough to bend thought. He turned his eyes to the horizon. Nothing moved, only the faint shimmer of heat that never left the salt. He closed his eyes, but even in darkness, he saw it, a shadow the size of memory itself. The ground trembled once, very faintly. He told himself it was the wind. By morning, the world was white again. The fire had died into gray powder. The tribe rose in silence. They ate little, roots and seeds, bitter and dry. Nicaro looked to the horizon and pointed. There, where the sky bent, a thin line of darker color. Maybe hills, maybe trees, maybe nothing. Hope and illusion were the same thing in this land, but still, they walked. Hours passed. The air grew hotter, thicker. The ground beneath them began to change, cracked salt giving way to crushed clay and small stones. Taro stopped suddenly. He crouched, hand hovering over a mark in the dirt. A footprint, not human. Wide as his chest, deep enough to hold water. The edges were sharp, fresh. Around it, the earth was broken, pressed down into patterns of circles and fissures. He followed them, one, then another, and another, a trail of destruction leading toward the horizon. When Nicaro joined him, she said nothing. She only looked at the path, then at the sky. A vulture circled above them, its wings cutting silent arcs through the heat. They followed the prints for half a day until the sun began to fall again. At the end of the trail, they found the impossible. The ground itself seemed to have been overturned. A stretch of land more than a man's length deep had been plowed open, as if a mountain had rolled across it. In the center, a single stone, broken clean in two. The mark on it was unmistakable. A groove, long, deep, curved. The mark of a horn. The tribe stood in silence. The wind rose, whistling through the hollow stone. The sky turned red as the sun fell. And from somewhere far beyond the horizon, a sound came, faint but certain, a deep bellow, slow, endless, the kind of sound that makes the heart forget its own rhythm. The ground trembled once more, then silence. The tribe stood still, their faces turned toward the dying sun. And Nicaro whispered, almost to herself, "It wakes." The wind carried her voice away, and night returned, quiet, heavy, waiting. The wind had changed again. It came from the east, carrying dust that shimmered like crushed bone. The air was thicker now, heavy with something unseen, a promise of movement, a memory of force. The tribe walked slower, every sound seemed louder, the crunch of salt underfoot, the creak of dried skin stretched over shoulders, the hollow murmur of wind passing through cracked stone. Even the children were quiet. The silence of adults had taught them to listen. By midday, The light was strange. The sky had turned the color of pale ash, and shadows stretched longer than they should. The air held a taste, metallic, sharp, like storm water over stone. The tribe stopped when the ground trembled. It was slight at first, a gentle sway beneath the soles, enough to make dust leap from the surface. Then it grew, a pulse, slow, deep, rhythmic. The world was breathing. Nicaro looked toward the horizon. Her face remained calm, but her hand tightened around her walking stick until the wood creaked. She knew the sound. She had heard it once before, many seasons ago, when the plains split open and something older than men had moved beneath them. The tremor passed. The air went still again, as if pretending nothing had happened. But the ground remembered. When they moved on, the hunters walked ahead, spears in hand, eyes on the dust. They followed the trail of prints found the day before. Each step led them deeper into a valley carved by time and wind, its floor flat, its walls smooth and high, like the ribs of a buried giant. The air grew cooler there, shadows long and sharp. The tribe entered in single file. Their footsteps echoed softly against stone. At the valley's center, the earth opened. A trench, vast and dark, filled with fragments of bone. Some were small, others thick as a human's thigh. The marks on them were clear, cracks, splits, crushed hollows, bones that had not been eaten, but broken. Taro knelt. His hand brushed against one, and it crumbled under his fingers. The dust rose, a thin, white cloud that stung his eyes. These bones are not old, he thought. They are recent. They still remember shape. Above, the vultures circled. Their shadows moved over the walls of the valley like black stains. The tribe left the trench in silence. They climbed the far ridge, and there, from the top, they saw it. The plain stretched out before them, endless, cracked, shimmering with heat. Across it, long paths of destruction cut through the land. Lines of torn earth, where grass had been peeled away as if by the blade of a god. One line ended in a crater where the soil had been ripped apart. In the center of it, a single horn mark carved deep into the rock, spiraling outward like a symbol. Nicaro's eyes narrowed. She did not look at the mark itself, but at the air above it, shimmering, trembling. "The land is waiting," she whispered. The sun began to fall. The air cooled. The sky bled red along the edges. The hunters decided to camp on higher ground, where they could see far. They gathered dry roots and stones. The fire was weak, small, its light swallowed by the vastness. The tribe sat around it, their faces half hidden in the glow. Nicaro spoke softly, voice trembling like the flame itself. "There were once beasts too large to count," she said. "The world made them strong before it made us clever. They ruled not by hunger, but by memory. They walked where they wished, and the land moved for them." She looked into the fire, and for a moment, her reflection in the flame looked like that of a younger woman, fierce, alive, certain. "When they vanish," she continued, "the earth forgets how to tremble. When they return, it remembers." The fire crackled. No one answered, but the air beyond the flame seemed to echo her words. The night deepened. The stars burned sharp and cold. The tribe slept, except for Taro, who kept watch on the ridge. He listened. He always listened. At first, there was only wind, then something else, faint, distant, a low hum that rolled across the land, too deep to be thunder. He looked toward the horizon, where the plain met the stars, and saw dust rising in small, circular bursts, like breath leaving the earth. He felt it again, that pulse, that slow, steady rhythm. Each one matched his heartbeat, until he could no longer tell which belonged to him and which belonged to the world. The fire flickered. He turned. The flame leaned sideways, though there was no wind. The tremor came, this time stronger. It rattled the stones beneath his feet. Pebbles danced. The dry air shook. Taro reached for his spear. His hand trembled, not from fear but from instinct, the same instinct that had kept his people alive since the dawn of time. The ground groaned. A deep crack split the soil nearby, creeping toward the camp. The sleeping tribe woke to the sound, hearts pounding, eyes wide. The children clung to their mothers. The hunters formed a line around the fire. Nikaro stood tall, her shadow long and calm. She looked toward the plains, and in that moment, all sound vanished. No wind, no fire, no breath. Then, out of the silence, came the sound of movement, a slow, dragging step, another, and another, the rhythm of weight returning to the world. They could not see it, not yet, but they could feel it. Each step pressed through the air like invisible waves. The ground shook with them, soft at first, then stronger. The earth remembered its old language and spoke it again through trembling stone. Nikaro raised her hand. "Do not move," she whispered, though her lips barely parted. From the dark horizon, a faint light flickered, not fire, not star, but reflection. Something vast was moving, its shape catching the dying moonlight. Then came the sound that broke the night in two, a bellow, deep, endless, the voice of stone made flesh. It rolled across the plains, echoing off the ridges, filling every hollow, shaking every rib. The children wept without sound. The hunters' knuckles whitened around their spears. The beast was far, but distance meant nothing to its voice. The world had heard it again. Then silence returned, heavy, crushing, complete. Only the fire moved, flickering like a heart afraid to stop beating. The tribe did not sleep again that night. They sat watching the horizon, where dust still hung like smoke. And when the first light of dawn crept across the salt plains, the ground beneath them shuddered once more. A warning, a heartbeat, a promise. The land was no longer theirs. It belonged again to what walked upon it. At dawn, the sky bled gold and ash. The wind fell silent, as if the air itself were holding its breath for what was about to return. The tribe stood at the ridge above the valley of salt. Below them stretched an endless white plain, cracked and gleaming. It looked peaceful, a frozen sea made of light. But the earth was not still. It trembled beneath their feet, faint at first, then stronger, like the breath of something awakening beneath the crust. The hunters gripped their spears tighter. Sweat rolled down their backs, though the air was cold. A long, low sound rose from the horizon. Not thunder, not wind. A growl too deep to belong to flesh, too long to be called a roar. It came from the world itself. And then, out of the rising dust, it appeared, the Colossal Rhino. It walked with the confidence of a god that had never been challenged. Each step cracked the salt crust beneath its hooves, sending white shards flying. Its body was a fortress of gray muscle, scarred from old wars. The horn curved forward like a blade forged from darkness, its tip blackened by age. Its eyes, small, fierce, ancient, burned with the weight of memory. It stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than sound. The tribe watched from the ridge, 20 small shapes against the sky. The beast turned its head slowly, as if it could feel their gaze, and the air thickened between them. Then, without warning, it moved. A charge, faster than wind, faster than thought. The earth exploded under its weight, a storm of salt and dust rising in its wake. "Down!" shouted no one, but everybody knew. They scattered, running down the ridge, dust blinding, hearts pounding like drums in dry chests. The rhino struck the hill. Stone shattered. The ground split open like soft bread. A wall of air slammed into them, hot, fierce, tasting of minerals and fury. The hunters regrouped in the open plain, forming a half circle around the creature. Their spears looked like twigs against that mountain of muscle. The beast turned toward them, breathing hard, each exhale like the hiss of an open furnace. Salt clung to its flanks, glistening in the morning light. It pawed at the ground once, a deep scrape that carved a new scar in the earth. Then it charged again. The men threw their spears. The first struck its shoulder, bounced off. The second pierced shallowly into its hide, sticking like a thorn. The third found the gap near its neck and sank deep, dark blood spraying from the wound. The beast did not slow. It slammed into the line of hunters like a storm through dry grass. Bodies flew, spears snapped. The air filled with dust and cries swallowed by the wind. Nakaro stood at the rear, watching the chaos through eyes that saw both past and future. She raised her arm, pointing toward the far edge of the plain, toward the deep pit they had dug days ago, a trap meant for mammoths, lined with sharpened stakes. She did not shout. She only moved her hand, and Taro understood. He ran. The others followed, the survivors weaving through torn earth and swirling dust. The rhino turned, its horn dripping with the red shimmer of life. Its breath came in waves, hot and furious. It saw them running and followed. Each step it took was a small earthquake. Each breath bent the air. The hunters split into two groups, one to the left, one to the right, drawing the beast between them. It followed the noise, the movement, the pulse of life it could crush. Taro led it straight toward the pit. His heart raced. His feet barely touched the earth. The air vibrated behind him. He could feel the tremor through his spine, through his ribs. He reached the edge of the pit and leapt aside. The beast thundered past him, but stopped. The ground shook as its massive hooves dug into the soil. It halted, inches from the trap. It had seen it. The beast turned its head, fury flaring. Its horn swung toward Taro, and the wind whistled through the motion. He ducked, falling onto the cracked ground, dust filling his mouth. The rhino snorted, eyes burning with intelligence. It had learned. It charged again, not into the pit, but around it, circling the humans like a storm that had grown cunning. The hunters regrouped. They had no advantage left. The trap had failed. The plain was too open. The beast moved slower now, circling them. Its breath came heavy, its wounds steaming in the cold morning air. The humans stood close together, the fire of survival glowing behind their eyes. It lunged at them again, horn forward. Taro thrust his last spear into its side, the point buried deep, disappearing into flesh. The creature roared, the sound like the cracking of the sky itself. It swung its head violently, and the spear snapped. The broken shaft struck Taro's shoulder, throwing him backward. The beast turned toward him. He rolled away just before the horn struck, gouging a trench beside him. Dust and stone rained over his body. He scrambled to his knees, eyes stinging, vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw Nakaro standing still, not running, not hiding. She held a burning torch, the only fire they had left. The wind caught the flame, bending it sideways, scattering sparks across the salt. The rhino saw her. It lowered its head. It pawed once. The ground quaked. Nakaro did not move. She lifted the torch high. The firelight danced across her face, painting her in orange and gold. For a moment, she looked less like prey and more like memory itself, a figure carved by time. The beast charged. Taro shouted, his voice lost in the thunder. The distance between them vanished. The torch flared brighter. At the last instant, Nakaro threw the fire to the ground. It landed on a patch of dry resin and roots, the last remnant of the old fire they had built the night before. Flame erupted. The rhino barreled through it, bellowing, its skin lit by orange light. Smoke rose around it, blinding and wild. The beast stumbled, once, twice, its massive body crashing sideways. The ground split under its weight. One of its legs struck the edge of the pit and slid. The earth gave way. Salt and soil collapsed. The rhino fell. A sound like thunder rolled across the valley, a sound that seemed to shake the stars themselves. Then silence, only the crackle of fire. The humans stood still, eyes wide, bodies trembling from the echo of what had happened. Taro limped toward the edge of the pit. Smoke and dust still swirled below, hiding the creature. He peered down. The beast lay motionless at the bottom. Its chest rose once, twice, then stopped. He exhaled, slow and trembling. The tribe gathered beside him, their faces blank with disbelief. The wind began to rise again, carrying away the smoke. The morning sun climbed higher, touching the plain with light. For the first time in days, the earth was still. Nicaro knelt at the pit's edge. She did not smile. She only whispered, "It has returned to the dust that made it." Her words drifted upward, carried by the same wind that had once brought fear. But even as the tribe began to breathe again, the ground beneath them trembled, faint, hesitant, like a dying heartbeat. They looked down. The rhino's massive chest rose again. Its eyes opened, dim, furious, eternal. It bellowed one last time, a sound not of life, but of defiance. The horn struck the pit wall, shattering stone, sending shards flying. The hunters stumbled back. The dust swallowed the light. Then, silence again. This time final. When the dust cleared, the beast no longer moved. The tribe stood in the golden light of morning, surrounded by smoke and silence. They had survived, but they did not cheer. There was no victory in this kind of survival. Only awe. The ground was scarred, torn open. The air was thick with the scent of salt, stone, and something older than either, the scent of the world remembering itself. They turned away from the pit. The sun rose high, casting their long shadows across the wounded earth. Behind them, the body of the rhino glowed faintly in the light, a monument of dust and strength, already becoming part of the land once more. The sun had already begun to fade when the tremors stopped. The air stood still, heavy, tired, thick with the smell of dust and smoke. The battle was over, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the sound of war itself. The tribe stood around the pit. The great beast lay inside it, unmoving, its massive horn buried halfway into the cracked earth. Ash from the fire drifted down upon its hide, gathering in the folds of its skin like snow that had lost its color. The hunters did not cheer. No one spoke. They watched the creature as if it might rise again, as if the earth had not yet decided whether to keep it or return it. Taro sat apart from the others, his shoulder bandaged with torn hide, his face coated in dust. He stared into the pit for a long time. He could still feel the rhythm of the ground beneath his feet, faint, imaginary perhaps, but real enough to make him tremble. Nicaro stood near the fire, her back to the setting sun. The flames licked low and tired, their light soft and orange. Her face was carved in shadow. She looked older now, as though each breath had drawn a line across her skin. She knew the silence would not last. The world never let stillness linger too long. The wind returned first, gentle, cautious, moving across the plain as if afraid to disturb what had fallen. It carried the smell of salt and ash and something deeper, the scent of change. By dusk, the sky turned copper and gray. The tribe built a circle of small fires around the pit, not for light, but for memory. The children gathered stones, placing them in rows like silent offerings. The hunters stood watch, their spears grounded in the soil. They did not know what they guarded, the dead, the living, or the boundary between them. As night thickened, the stars came out. They burned bright and cold, scattered across the black like shards of bone. The firelight flickered against the white salt, turning it gold, then red, then black again. Nicaro knelt beside the nearest flame. Her eyes reflected the fire, as if holding a memory she had seen 1,000 times before. She whispered softly, not to the others, but to the ground. "The beast is gone," she said, "but its spirit will walk the earth until the land cools again." She took a handful of ash and pressed it to her forehead. Then she stood. Taro approached her slowly. He carried something in his hands, heavy, wrapped in a hide stained dark. When he set it down, the hide slipped open. It was the horn, broken from its base, splintered but whole enough to still carry its shape. Long, curved, blackened at the tip. It caught the firelight and gleamed faintly. The tribe gathered around. They looked at it not as a trophy but as something sacred. a fragment of a god that had once ruled the earth. Nkaro touched the horn's surface. It was warm, as if the creature's spirit had not yet cooled. She felt its pulse, faint, slow, ancient, and for a moment she could almost hear it breathe. "This will not stay here," she said. "The earth must not remember its shape too well. We will give it to the fire." The tribe stirred uneasily. To burn what was sacred was to risk angering what lay beyond. But Nkaro's voice was steady, her eyes bright with something that silenced fear. "The fire will carry its memory higher than the wind," she said, "so the land will rest." They gathered more wood, dry roots, reeds, branches scavenged from miles away. The fire grew taller, brighter, alive again. Flames rose high, curling toward the stars. The horn was lifted. Taro and 2 others carried it carefully, as if bearing the body of a chief. Its weight bowed their arms, but they did not falter. At the edge of the largest fire, they stopped. Nkaro stood before it. Her shadow stretched long behind her, touching the others like a thread between their hearts. She lifted both hands and whispered, "From earth to flame, from flame to sky, let strength return to silence." Together, they placed the horn upon the fire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flames shifted color, from gold to blue, from blue to white. A roar of heat rose into the night, wrapping around them like wind turned to sound. The horn hissed, cracked, and began to glow. Sparks leapt into the air, swirling upward, vanishing among the stars. Smoke drifted east, thick and slow, carrying with it the shape of the beast's memory. The tribe stood still. No one moved. They watched until the horn had melted into ash. When the fire dimmed, Nkaro closed her eyes. She could feel warmth on her face, on her hands. The warmth of the creature, of the sun, of the earth itself, all the same. Behind her, Taro spoke softly. "What will become of us now?" She opened her eyes, gazing at the plain, vast, wounded, quiet. "The same as always," she said. "We walk. We remember. We endure." Her voice was calm, but her gaze was distant, fixed on something beyond the dark horizon. The night grew colder. The flames sank into coals, then into faint red embers. The air smelled of iron and smoke and old dust. The tribe lay down to rest, huddled close for warmth. But Nkaro did not sleep. She sat beside the dying fire, watching its last light flicker across the salt. The stars reflected faintly on the ground, as if the heavens had bent low to look at the scars below. She thought of the beast, the way it had moved, unstoppable, unafraid. She thought of the moment it fell, of the sound it made, not a scream, but a breath released back to the world. In that sound, she had heard something familiar, something human, because in the end, they had both fought for the same thing, to remain, to leave a mark that would not fade with the dust. The wind shifted. It touched her face, soft as memory. She looked up, the sky above her deep and endless. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a movement among the stars, a shadow shaped like the beast, walking slow and quiet across the heavens. She smiled. The earth below her was still. She reached into the ashes and took a small piece of the horn, blackened, fragile, cold. She wrapped it in cloth and tied it around her neck. "For strength," she whispered, "for the memory of the mountain that walked." The fires died one by one. Only smoke remained, drifting low across the plain. The smell of salt returned, clean, pure, endless. Far in the east, the horizon brightened faintly, the first color of dawn, pale and silver. The tribe rose slowly, their breath visible in the cold air. They stood facing the light, their silhouettes long and thin against the awakening world. No one spoke. They did not need to. Behind them, the pit was now quiet, filled with smoke and shadow. The fire's last warmth still glowed faintly at its heart, the last heartbeat of something greater than all of them. As they began to walk, the earth no longer trembled. It simply breathed, calm, slow, alive. And with each step, the tribe carried more than tools and fire. They carried memory. They carried story. The land would heal. The plains would forget. But humanity would remember. The horn was gone. The fire was gone. But in their place, something eternal had begun. Morning rose like a sigh. The sky no longer burned red. It stretched pale and wide, washed clean by the breath of the night. The salt plains glimmered under the first light, not as wounds, but as mirrors. Every fracture in the ground shone like silver veins. Every scar turned to light. The tribe stood at the edge of what had been the battlefield. Where the pit once smoked, now there was only stillness. The ashes of the fire had spread thinly across the plain, blending with dust and salt until it was impossible to tell where the beast had fallen. Nkaro stood motionless. The faint wind tugged at her hair, carrying with it the scent of morning, dry, cool, pure. Around her neck, the small fragment of horn rested against her chest, warm from the rising sun. Taro stood beside her, silent. His arm was bound in fresh hide, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were alive again. He looked to the horizon where a faint shimmer hinted at water. Perhaps real, perhaps not. It didn't matter. They would walk toward it either way. Behind them, the tribe prepared to move. They gathered what remained of their tools, the hides, the coals from the smallest fire still glowing red. Children clung to their mothers, blinking against the light. No one spoke. Words had no place here. The land itself seemed to whisper. The ground no longer trembled. The air no longer carried the echo of fury. Even the wind was gentle now, as though the world had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Nkaro looked down at her hands. They were blackened with soot, the skin cracked and dry. She brushed her palm against the earth, leaving a faint print in the salt. The mark looked small, almost fragile, yet she knew, someday, when the wind had erased even the scars of the battle, that print would still be there, hidden beneath the surface, a memory of life. The tribe began to move. Slow steps at first, careful, cautious, as if the ground might still wake beneath them. But the earth remained calm. They crossed the plain, leaving behind the place of fire and stone. The morning light grew brighter, touching the curve of the horizon, painting it gold. Their shadows stretched long and thin across the salt, human figures against the infinite. Each carried something different, a tool, a child, a piece of burned wood. But what they truly carried was unseen, a story, a lesson, a rhythm that would outlive them all. They had faced the mountain that walked. They had seen strength older than sky itself, and they had survived. As they climbed the far ridge, Nkaro paused and looked back one last time. The plain behind them was vast, empty, glowing in silence. From that distance, it looked peaceful. No blood, no bones, no proof of what had happened. Only beauty. And perhaps that was right. Perhaps the earth had already begun to heal itself by forgetting. She turned her eyes to the horizon ahead. The light there shimmered, broken by heat. Somewhere beyond it, there would be new land, new danger, new life. The cycle would begin again, as it always did. They walked. Their footsteps left faint impressions on the salt, each one filled with sunlight. The narrator's voice softened, becoming almost wind itself. The beast had been strength given shape. The humans were weakness that learned to endure. And between those two, the world found balance again. Time passed. The sun rose higher. The wind picked up, sweeping away the prints, erasing them as gently as they had been made. Only their direction remained. Forward. Taro looked once more toward Nkaro, walking ahead of the tribe. Her figure was small against the rising light, yet in that moment she seemed endless, like a line drawn by the sun itself. The boy who walked beside him, one of the youngest, his face still streaked with ash, whispered softly, "Will it come back?" Taro did not answer for a long time. Then he said, "Everything does, But not today. The child nodded. That was enough. The wind carried their words away, scattering them like seeds. At the top of the ridge, the tribe stopped. Below them stretched the next valley, dry, quiet, open, but beyond that, far in the haze, something shimmered, green, faint, distant, life. They began the descent, each step lighter than the one before, each breath deeper. The world seemed new again, washed clean by fire and dust. The sky grew brighter still, and the heat returned, soft at first, like a reminder that life is never gentle for long. But they no longer feared it. They had seen what fear was made of. They had looked it in the eyes and lived. Nicaro led them onward. Her voice rose once, not loud, but steady, the tone of someone speaking to the wind. The mountain fell. The earth remembers. And so do we. The others followed, repeating the last line softly until it became a murmur, a rhythm, a song, the first song perhaps, born not from joy, but from survival. Their voices blended with the wind, with the hum of the waking land, until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. The camera of imagination lifts now, slowly, endlessly, rising above the plain, the figures shrinking to dots, then to shadows, then to nothing. Only the landscape remains. White salt, golden sun, the whisper of wind over silence. And beneath it all, deep in the layers of earth, the bones of the colossal rhino rest, still and vast, waiting for time to turn them to stone. A memory of strength, a monument of what once ruled. The narrator's voice becomes the earth itself, ancient and tender. The beast taught them fear. Fear taught them fire, and fire taught them how to endure. The sun flares brighter, swallowing the horizon in light. The sound of the wind fades into stillness, and that's how humanity survived, once again.